Hi, I'm Linda Mal, and welcome to Art This Week. On this week's episode, we visit the Meadows Museum, and our interviewer, Aimee Cardoso, speaks with curator Edward Payne about the exhibition Between Heaven and Hell, the drawings of Jusepe de Ribera. Now for Art This Week.
Hi, we're here at the Meadows Museum at SMU to talk to Edward Payne, who's a senior curator of Spanish art at Auckland Castle in England, about the exhibition Between Heaven and Hell, the drawings of Jusepe de Ribera.
Hello.
Thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me.
So, Ribera was a prolific draftsman, an outstanding painter, and an influential printmaker. Before getting into the focus of the exhibition, which are his drawings, can you tell us a little bit about the artist and his work?
Absolutely. So Ribera was born in 1591 in Játiva, in the province of Valencia. And for the first 20 years or so of his life, we don't know that much about him, his training, his youth, and exactly via what route he traveled from Spain to Italy. But we do know that he was in Rome by 1606, he's recorded in Parma in 1611, and then he's in Rome in the 1610s, and that's where he first encounters Caravaggio's paintings. And this was incredibly influential for him. Caravaggio revolutionized the world of painting in Rome and also in Naples, which was a Spanish territory in the 17th century, and this is where Ribera moved in 1616 and spent the remainder of his life. So until he dies in 1652, he is in Naples working for the Spanish viceroys who were appointed by the king. So Ribera is a very important court artist, and one of the main distinctions between Ribera and other followers of Caravaggio is that he was not just a painter, he also operated in a graphic mode. A prolific draftsman, as you say, and also a very important printmaker.
So the catalog for the exhibition is quite extensive, as you can see here. What was the process of putting this together, and how long did it take?
Oh, very good question. So the seed of the catalog raisonné is actually the fourth chapter of the PhD thesis of its main author, Gabriele Finaldi. And this chapter focused on all of the known drawings by Ribera until 1995. And so that was the point of departure for this project. But Ribera's drawings had been studied previously by Jonathan Brown in the 1970s and 80s. However, no complete catalog raisonné of Ribera's drawings had been attempted until now. So it was a very interesting process, and one where we had to engage extensively with previous scholarship, but also with the study of the drawings themselves. We tried to see as many originals as possible and examine them with curators and conservators in order to discern all the various markings on them. There's a lot of detective work that comes in the study of drawings, so it was a fascinating process, and I certainly learned a lot. And in terms of numbers, we have cataloged 157 drawings which are now attributed to Ribera, a small group of works where there's some doubt as to their authenticity, and the final section of the catalog contains drawings which we believe to be by hands other than his. So a lot of these questions of attribution are still open-ended, but I think this catalog represents an important milestone in the scholarship on Ribera drawings. And what the exhibition does is it essentially is a showcase of highlights of drawings by Ribera in the context of related paintings and prints. So not isolating the drawings from his other media, but showing how Ribera worked in all three media and how there are these dialogues between them. And this is really quite important. So the exhibition is a show of the catalog as opposed to the other way around, and it's a wonderful opportunity for people to be introduced to Ribera, the graphic artist, who is, with the exception of the prints, perhaps less familiar than Ribera, the painter.
You were talking a little bit about how you learned a lot. And the catalog and the exhibit really, focus on the importance of the drawings. And in these works, we see a lot of different processes and medium that are showing his skilled drawing techniques.
Yes.
What are some of the similarities and differences that you found going through all of these and seeing them all together in the exhibition?
Oh, that's a very good question. So Ribera's dominant medium in drawing was pen and ink. So most of the drawings are in pen and ink, and some with wash as well, so diluted ink, giving them a painterly kind of appearance. And the remainder of his drawings are in either red chalk or a combination of red and black chalks. And what's been really interesting working on these drawings is getting to know Ribera's handwriting. At the beginning of this process of cataloging the drawings, for me anyway, as a relative newcomer to Ribera, not having worked on him for as long as some of my senior colleagues in the field, I was not so familiar with the handwriting of Ribera, say, working in the 1620s. But after a while, you do get to know his hand, and it's really quite exciting to be able to see something and to put it within a certain date bracket. One thing that you'll notice as well about the catalog is that the date brackets for Ribera's drawings are quite open. And this has been done so deliberately because we don't always know exactly when he made a certain work of art. There's only one drawing which is signed and dated by his hand. So relatively few drawings by Ribera are dated. And so that one drawing provides a very crucial coordinate for us in order to build the corpus. And also, increasingly complicated in this story, is that very few surviving drawings by Ribera are preparatory for known paintings and prints. So most of them are independent studies of subjects which are related to the known paintings and prints, but they are independent works of art. And there's quite a range of subjects that you'll encounter in this exhibition, from religious themes, the dominant subject throughout his work, but also mythological subjects, grotesque heads, scenes from everyday life, and even more capricious drawings with little figures climbing on top of larger ones. Exactly. And other observations from his daily life in Naples. So drawing was, I'd say, a quotidian pattern for Ribera. He did it throughout his career, and the fragments that survive probably represent maybe half of as many drawings as he might have produced. So a lot of what we see is the accident of survival and the preservation of drawings which are by nature fragile. They're works on paper, and so some of them may have been discarded in the process over the years. So it's really a wonderful opportunity to see these things together for the first time, many of them. There's a lot of new discoveries for me too, sheets that I'd not seen before from public and private collections as well. So that has been quite thrilling.
So we're standing in front of 3 different versions of the Penitence of St. Peter.
Yes.
A chalk, a pen and ink drawing, and then obviously the final painting. Can you tell us how he might have moved from working here to the actual finished piece?
Absolutely. It's a great question. So this is Ribera's earliest surviving Neapolitan drawing, and a very rare example of a preparatory drawing for a known painting. And what he does is essentially it's a wash drawing. So he uses brown wash, and he also uses ink in order to heighten certain passages and to give depth, definition, but he uses the ink also to cancel out an idea that he had, so he's reverting to an original position of the figure's legs. And you see that he's quite faithful to this composition in the painting. And then what's really interesting is that he reproduces the painting in a print. And this is one of his first dated prints, 1621, and you'll notice what he's done here is that he has actually etched the composition in reverse so that the impression corresponds with the orientation of the painting itself. Normally printmaking is a process of reversal, so we'd expect to see this the other way around. And you'll notice as well that at the bottom he has signed the print with his monogram and also dated it, but he had forgotten to flip the numbers so they appear in reverse there.
I was going to ask you about that.
But this is a very special case. This is the only surviving example of the same composition by Ribera in all 3 media. So it's very, very special. And that's why we wanted to begin the whole exhibition this way, because it sets up what visitors will encounter throughout the show, which is Ribera, an artist who worked in 3 media, and his drawings in the context of paintings and prints.
Yeah, he's not just a
He's
painter.
not just a painter. And you do see that Caravagesque influence there in the painting with the dark background, the dramatic lighting, the use of a live model as well. But the fact that he planned it here in a drawing is completely counter to what Caravaggio would have done. There are no surviving drawings by Caravaggio on paper. He purposefully bypassed that preparatory stage in the process of making work of art in order to translate nature directly onto the canvas. That was absolutely fundamental to his realism. So Ribera, while in part following Caravaggio and using that technique of lighting his compositions dramatically and also using live models, he complicates that realist mode of representation by drawing live models as well as painting live models, and by preparing his compositions through drawing, which was a classicist tendency of artists like Guido Reni or Domenichino. So that's where he becomes quite a complicated figure. He really is a man in between. He's caught in between different artistic traditions and between two countries as well, and he really uses that to his advantage. So he's responding to the influences in 17th century Rome and Naples in order to really excel as the preeminent artist of his time. So whereas Caravaggio absolutely changed the face of painting, it's been argued that Ribera changed the face of drawing and printmaking. He was extremely influential in that regard.
He seems to have quite a bit of dark humor in his work. There are numerous depictions of torture scenes. He's being flayed here. And then there's also a lot of grotesque portraits with goiters, I believe they're called, the enlarged thyroid or neck. Do you think he enjoys the challenge of depicting these figures?
Absolutely. Ribera was very interested in representing extremes of human experience, whether they were grotesque deformities or figures under torture. And he really took advantage of these subjects in order to exploit his mastery as an artist who is able to depict these things in such an extraordinary way. And with respect to his images of torture, you know, 1/4 of his surviving graphic output is composed of men tied to trees. So he was particularly interested in that subject, but I don't know if it was so much a sadistic obsession and more an opportunity for him to explore the body in complicated configurations. Again, exploiting that mastery of the artist who's able to do something on paper or on canvas that can't be done in reality. So using the live model as a point of departure, whether a posed model lying on the ground or a studio model being tied up, and giving that subject a context. So it's not just an academy drawing, say, a life drawing divorced of a context, but it's a figure who could be then turned into Saint Sebastian or Saint Bartholomew flayed alive. So that was partly his interest in torture, and the other interest came out of his own experience living in 17th century Naples and using drawing as an opportunity to record and document the things that he saw, heard about, experienced. And so one does find in his drawings subjects which are not represented in his paintings and prints. So scenes of violence on the streets of everyday Naples, for example, torture subjects, scenes from the Inquisition.
And this painting is all about the scream right here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I mean, you stare at this and you can hear the sound.
It's a very loud painting.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Can you tell us a little bit about, you know, how he would have painted this, and then also
Definitely.
how this mouth relates back to his studies of the nose and the open mouth that he did?
Absolutely. So the subject here is Apollo flaying Marsyas alive, and he represented this subject numerous times throughout his career, but only 2 paintings survive and 1 very small preparatory drawing for this particular composition. So this painting is signed and dated by the artist 1637. And the subject represents the classical myth of the satyr, Marsyas, he's half man, half goat, who challenges Apollo, god of the muses, to a musical competition. Marsyas competes with his aulos, his reed instrument, which is hanging there from the branch, and Apollo with his 7-string lyre, which Ribera actually updates into a viola da braccio, a Baroque instrument here. And the terms of the competition were that the victor could do with the loser as he pleased. And so Marsyas inevitably loses, and Apollo punishes him for his sin of hubris by tying him to a tree and flaying him alive. This might seem quite harsh as a punishment for losing a musical competition, but I think in Ribera's time, during the Renaissance and Baroque periods, this would have seemed somehow justified punishment for the sin of pride. And what's interesting is that there are variations on how Apollo wins the musical competition. Essentially, he outwits Marsyas. In one version, he says to Marsyas, sing while playing your lyre, of course, or sing rather while playing your aulos. Of course, Marsyas cannot do that, and he loses. Another version, Apollo says to Marsyas, play your instrument upside down. And of course, Marsyas cannot do that. But what's really interesting is the way in which Ribera has conceived this subject, because Apollo and Marsyas, this subject has been depicted countless times since antiquity, and Ribera would have known earlier representations of the subject, but he completely revolutionizes his way of portraying it by showing Marsyas here, bound to the tree, lying on the ground in this recumbent position. And Apollo is flaying him alive with his hands, so he's representing this moment of extreme pain and torture. You can see the knife is actually stabbed into the side of the tree. But what he's done as well is he has used this subject as an opportunity to comment on the arts, rivalry within the arts. This whole painting is about sound and the senses as much as it is about the arts and art making. So if you look at Apollo, he's portrayed in a rather sculptural-like way with this marble-like skin and billowing drapery, recalling a classical sculpture from antiquity. And Marsyas is here portrayed with this palette of earthy tones and his face flushed, screaming. And if you look at the positioning of Apollo's arm, he is tearing Marsyas's skin almost in the exact same position as he would be playing his lyre, exactly. And Marsyas here screaming, his face flushed, a very similar effect to what would happen when playing his aulos. So Ribera has reenacted the musical competition in his portrayal of Apollo flaying Marsyas. And what's interesting is if the whole myth is about rivalry in the arts, rivalry in this musical competition, then in the painting, Ribera takes it one step further by alluding to rivalry in the visual arts as well, the paragone, the competition or rivalry between sculpture and painting, sound and silence, one could say. And I should point out here in the background this detail of these satyrs, these onlookers who are responding to what's going on here in the foreground. So one actually plugging his ears to try and block out the noise, and others responding in horror. And you can see to the side of the painting we have two drawings, one in red chalk and another one on blue paper, head studies of satyrs with their mouths open, so again responding to something going on beyond the composition. And this motif of the open mouth, which we get here in Ribera's depiction of Marsyas, as well as in the head studies of satyrs, originally is in an etching from the early 1620s, which formed part of a pattern book. And this was done for students who were learning the principles of drawing. So they would begin by copying studies of eyes, ears, noses, and mouths, so different anatomical features. And what Ribera does is a whole tradition, a pattern book tradition. So Ribera's taking it and again, going one step further, particularizing these different features, so adding grotesque elements similar to those grotesque heads which we saw, so the hair sprouting warts. But he's also depicting not just noses and mouths, but expression, a screaming mouth, wide open mouth. And we think that his inspiration for that motif may have been either with that study etching Leonardo's grotesque heads, a sheet of 5 studies which he would have known in print, or more likely the case, a wax relief done by his father-in-law, Giovanni Bernardino Azzolino. And this wax relief portrays a soul in hell, and it was one of a series of 4 souls in different states. Soul in purgatory, soul at death, soul in hell, soul in paradise. It's very interesting, this particular motif, and how Ribera returns to it on numerous occasions, notably in his paintings of Apollo and Marsyas, in order to explore the sensory perceptions of violence and to take the subject beyond the world of painting and extend it out into our world here. He's very interested in how different figures respond to violent acts, and you see how Marsyas is actually looking out directly at the spectator, but Apollo isn't. He's not looking at the skin that he's flaying, he's looking at Marsyas himself, almost controlling, absolutely. And then you've got those figures in the background. So this is very typical with Ribera, where you get his emphasis on these different, what I called spectator subjects. So the victim of violence and torture, the executioner, and the spectators. And he's blurring the boundaries between those different actors, which make this scene of violence.
Thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
We want to thank Edward for speaking with us. For more information on the exhibition, go to meadowsmuseumdallas.org. That's it for Art This Week. Thanks for watching.
I still got your Polaroid.